TIFU by trying to pull off the perfect crime and getting caught. Hey Reddit, this is a throwaway account because, well, you'll understand why. I never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but here we are. Buckle up, it's a wild ride. So, about a year ago, I was in a really tight spot financially. I had lost my job, my savings were dwindling, and the bills were piling up. Desperation does strange things to a person. I started looking for ways to make quick money, and that's when I stumbled upon a dark corner of the internet. I found this online forum where people shared tips on, let's just say, not so legal ways to make money. One particular post caught my eye. It was about a foolproof method to rob a small business without getting caught. The plan seemed solid, and the author claimed to have done it successfully multiple times. I should have known better, but desperate times, right? The target was a small jewelry store in a nearby town. According to the post, the owner was an older man who didn't believe in modern security systems. The place had an outdated alarm and no security cameras. The idea was to break in during the early hours of the morning, grab the most valuable items, and get out before anyone noticed. I spent the next few weeks preparing. I bought some basic equipment, a crowbar, gloves, a ski mask, and a cheap burner phone. I scouted the place, took notes on the owner's routine, and even practiced breaking into my own garage to make sure I knew what I was doing. Everything seemed to be lining up perfectly. The night of the heist, my nerves were shot. I waited until 3 a.m., dressed in all black, and drove to the jewelry store. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance to avoid drawing attention. When I reached the store, I took a deep breath, put on my gloves, and got to work. The lock was easier to break than I expected. Within minutes, I was inside. The place was dark and eerily quiet. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to the display cases. My heart was pounding in my chest as I smashed the glass and started grabbing the most expensive-looking items. In less than 10 minutes, I had filled my backpack with gold and diamond jewelry. I was about to leave when I heard a noise. My heart stopped. I froze, listening intently. It was just the wind, I told myself. I continued towards the back door, which I planned to use as my exit. But then I heard the noise again, this time unmistakably footsteps. Panic set in. I bolted for the back door, but as soon as I opened it, I was blinded by a bright light. "Freeze! Police!" someone shouted. I dropped the backpack and raised my hands, my mind racing. How did they know? What went wrong? Turns out the old man wasn't as naive as I thought. He had recently installed a silent alarm system that alerted the police directly. They had been watching the store ever since the alarm went off when I broke in. I was caught red-handed. I was arrested and charged with breaking and entering, theft, and a slew of other charges. My court-appointed lawyer did their best, but the evidence was overwhelming. I pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but I still ended up with 2 years in prison. Prison was rough, to say the least. It was a humbling experience that made me reevaluate my life choices. I spent most of my time there reading, reflecting, and trying to figure out how I could turn my life around once I got out. I made a promise to myself that I would never let desperation drive me to make such poor decisions again. Now I'm out on parole, working a low-paying job and trying to rebuild my life. It's not easy, but I'm determined to stay on the straight and narrow. I'm also seeing a therapist to deal with the underlying issues that led me to that dark place in the first place. But let me give you more details about the entire ordeal and how it unfolded. When I first came across that forum, I was fascinated by the lengths people would go to make money illegally. There were detailed posts about everything from shoplifting techniques to more elaborate cons. I spent hours reading through them, getting sucked into this world of deception. At first, it was more out of curiosity than anything else, but as my financial situation worsened, those ideas started to look more and more appealing. The post about the jewelry store heist stood out because it seemed relatively low risk compared to the other schemes. The author had laid out a step-by-step guide, complete with a list of supplies and a detailed plan for avoiding detection. According to them, the key was to be quick and avoid leaving any traces. They even suggested specific tools to use and the best times to strike. I followed their advice to the letter. I scouted the jewelry store multiple times, taking note of the owner's routine and the store's layout. I also familiarized myself with the nearby streets and alleys, planning my escape route meticulously. The more I planned, the more confident I became that I could pull it off. In the days leading up to the heist, I was a bundle of nerves. I'd never done anything like this before, and the fear of getting caught was constantly in the back of my mind. But the thought of clearing my debts and having some financial breathing room was too tempting to resist. I convinced myself that it was a one time thing and that I'd go back to living a normal life once it was over. The night of the heist, I barely slept. I kept going over the plan in my head, making sure I hadn't missed anything. At around 2 a.m., I got dressed in my all black outfit and grabbed my gear. My hands were shaking as I drove to the jewelry store, but I tried to stay calm. I parked a few blocks away as planned and walked the rest of the way, sticking to the shadows. Breaking into the store was surprisingly easy. The lock was old and gave way with minimal effort. Once inside, I moved quickly, smashing the display cases and grabbing whatever looked valuable. I kept checking my watch, making sure I wasn't taking too long. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until I heard those footsteps. My heart was pounding as I made a run for the back door. The moment I saw the police, I knew it was over. They had me surrounded. I dropped the backpack and put my hands up, my mind racing with questions. How did they get here so fast? What went wrong? As I found out later, the jewelry store owner had installed a new silent alarm system just a few weeks prior. The system was connected directly to the local police department, and the alarm had gone off as soon as I broke in. The police had been monitoring the store the whole time I was inside, waiting for the right moment to catch me in the act. The arrest was a blur. One minute I was trying to make my escape, and the next, I was in handcuffs, being read my rights. I was taken to the station, booked, and thrown into a holding cell. The reality of the situation didn't fully hit me until I was sitting there, staring at the cold gray walls. My court appointed lawyer did what they could, but the evidence against me was overwhelming. The police had caught me red handed, and there was no denying my guilt. I pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but I still ended up with 2 years in prison. Prison was a harsh wake up call. The first few weeks were the toughest. I had to learn how to navigate the prison environment, avoid trouble, and keep my head down. It was a brutal place, and I quickly realized that I needed to stay focused if I wanted to make it through. I spent a lot of time reading and reflecting on my life choices. I read anything I could get my hands on: novels, self help books, and even textbooks on various subjects. I also started attending therapy sessions that were offered in the prison. Talking to a therapist helped me understand the underlying issues that had led me down such a dark path. I began to see that my desperation and poor decisions were symptoms of deeper problems that I needed to address. When I was finally released on parole, I was determined to turn my life around. I found a low paying job at a local grocery store and started working to rebuild my life from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work and it gave me a sense of purpose. I also continued therapy on the outside, focusing on building a healthier mindset and setting new goals for my future. The road to recovery has been long and challenging. There have been days when I felt overwhelmed and tempted to fall back into old habits, but I've stayed strong. I've reconnected with some old friends who have been incredibly supportive, and I've made new connections through my job and therapy. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. I went from a desperate, reckless individual willing to risk everything for quick money to someone who is slowly but surely rebuilding their life with integrity. The experience has taught me that there are no shortcuts in life, and that true success comes from hard work, perseverance, and making better choices. So that's my extended story, Reddit. If you're ever in a tight spot, remember that there are always better options than resorting to crime. It might seem like a quick fix, but it's not worth the consequences. Stay safe, make good choices, and take care of yourselves.